On the far right, on my far right is Gina Winchester, Deputy County Executive. Next to Gina is Randy Patterson, President of the Calloway County Genealogical and Historical Society and a member of the Jackson Purchase Historical Society. Pat Seiber, member of Calloway County Genealogical Society and the Jackson Purchase Historical Society. And on the far left, although that's not a political statement, Bobbie Smith Bryant, who is also a member of both organizations and has been a contributor to our journal on a number of occasions, spoken in other programs. We have a crack panel, and we hope it'll be a great presentation.
Excellent. Gina, if you want to start us off, I think since you and the judge instigated and initiated, it's a perfect place to start.
Oh, I would be glad to do that. And I just want to say, first and foremost, thank you to the Jackson Purchase Historical Society for being a part of this celebration. It has been an amazing ride for almost 4 years. We actually started, and for those of you who may or may not know this, I have to give credit where credit is due. This really was the brainchild of our current county judge executive. Kenny Imes, when he was elected in 2019, I think he was already visioning and thinking about this. And because one of the first things he said to me when he asked me if I would come on board and be his deputy. And by the way, for those of you who don't have a clue about what a deputy does, I don't either. There's no job description. So whatever he tells me to do, I do. So I had no idea in 2019 I would be doing all of this. But anyway, be that as it may, he actually asked me to put a proclamation together that said, because there was a little bit of I won't say controversy, but there was a little bit of confusion about our actual physical birthday. Because at that point in time, our little banner logo buttons all said 2023. So he did some research and got into trying to figure out if we should celebrate 2022 or 2023. So as it came down to the final decision, 2022, in November of 2022 is when the actual legislation was passed in Frankfurt that created the county. 2023, January 2023 was the first fiscal court meeting. So that's where the confusion is trying to figure out which do we celebrate? Do we celebrate the act or do we celebrate the actual first meeting of the court? So his decision was, we want to celebrate in 2022. So we passed a proclamation that officially declared our Founders Day as November 3rd of 2022. So upon that passage of that proclamation, the ball began to roll. And he tasked me with putting together or forming a committee that would not only help plan for that event, that year of events, that day, that Founders Day, but he also wanted, and again, this was his vision and his brainchild, is he wanted something that would be a culmination and something that the people, the citizens of the county could hang on to as we celebrated, we did it, and here's the result, and here's what we're going to have from now on out. And in his mind, it was a book. It was possibly maybe more of a coffee table book. Is what we kind of started with, is when in our discussion of, what do we want, what would be nice to give everybody. So we kind of went from that discussion to putting out an RFP in which we were able to find, I guess, through this process, this procurement process, a company in Seiber, Missouri, Acclaim Press. And in finding that company, we also found Bobbie Smith Bryant, who had been an author and publisher through that company. So as soon as we figured that out, I was like, Bobbie's the one for this job. We need her to do this for the county. So she was agreeable. We contracted with Acclaim Press. They worked with her as the author to make sure that she got paid, because it was many, many hours on her part of putting all of this history and this work together. So Acclaim Press, again, can't say enough wonderful things about them as a publishing company. They've bent over backwards for us to put this project together. They actually have said, Doug Sykes, the publisher, has actually said numerous times, it is the most comprehensive book he has done for any county, any organization in his history. He said, I've never worked with an organization, a group like this. He was like, typically it's, you know, one group, one organization, a fundraiser, and that's it. But he said, you all have encompassed anything and everything in the community. So that's what we started with, is we started with that vision of having a book, a commemorative book that would be available in 2022. We had numerous people that came to the table to help on this project, and I cannot name all of them because we had a lot that started with us in 2019 for various reasons, couldn't continue on, but have been an integral part. I mean, names like Constance Alexander and just Carrie McGinnis at the university, just people that stepped in and said, hey, you know, we want to be a part of this project. So in forming this committee, one of the things that I felt was important is, and especially when we found out that 2022 was going to be a milestone year for the community. We had the university celebrating the centennial, the school system celebrating a sesquicentennial, 150. We had numerous organizations, nonprofits, churches, all having this milestone year. So we wanted to be inclusive. And the other thing we didn't want to do is we didn't want to reinvent the wheel. We didn't want to step on anybody else's toes and say, hey, well, you know, we're going to do this and you can't do this because we're doing this. So we wanted to be inclusive. We wanted to make it just kind of a year-long celebration. So the committee came together, and I'll be honest, I've always been one to work smart and not hard. So I started looking to see what other communities had been doing for this type of an event, because again, I didn't have any experience in it. So lo and behold, come to find out, Henry County, Paris, Tennessee, just across the state line, was celebrating, I guess, major milestone. And I'm trying to remember if it was 200 or 100.
It was 200.
It's 200. Okay, so they were celebrating, and they literally had come together as a city county entity and were celebrating an entire year. So we brought in Carl Holder from Paris, Tennessee, to meet with our committee, one of our very first meetings, and kind of listen to what they did with their project. And he brought a lot of things to the table that I hadn't even really thought about. Things like policy decisions. You know, who's going to be at the table? Who's going to pay for it? Where's your funding going to come from? Who's going to be on board? Promotions, who's going to promote? Who's going to market this for you? Events, exhibitors, you know, giveaways. I mean, there were so many things that we hadn't really thought about as a committee. So it was nice to partner even with our neighbors across the state line and to look at some of the things they had done that were successful, and to kind of use their expertise in helping us form what we ended up doing, which was a year-long celebration in the history book. So with that, I think I'm going to kind of stop and let the others kind of share their experience in the journey that we went through. And then I may kind of circle back around and talk about kind of how it all came together at the end at Founders Day. So Randy, you're on.
Oh, good morning. Excuse me. Good morning again. As Bill said, I'm Randy Patterson, the president of the Calloway County Genealogical and Historical Society. And on behalf of the society, welcome to Calloway County, virtually even at this very special time, our 200th birthday. Welcome also to the city of Murray. It would be not the roundest of anniversaries like 150 or 200, but this year the city of Murray is 180 years old. It was founded in 1842 when Marshall County was created from Calloway County, as Calloway County had been created from Hickman County. Essentially, the original Calloway County configuration was sliced in half. And Wadesboro, which was the initial county seat, wound up on the county line. I think today, actually, most of what was Wadesboro is in Marshall County. So Callaway County wanted a new county seat. Didn't make much sense to have the county seat almost in the county to the north. So Murray, the land that Murray is on today, became the city of Murray. There was not a town here already. There were some communities and there was a post office, but it was called Williston. And the city was named after Congressman John L. Murray. So welcome to Murray as well. I was very honored to be asked to work on the book. I don't know if you've seen the book yet, Bruce, but here is the book, Capital, 5.5 pounds, 5.5 pounds.
400 pages.
400 pages, an index. I was an English teacher, so I'm always conscious of capital letters and punctuation and that kind of thing. So when I say the book, you can think capital T, capital B. So the book. I was very honored to be asked to work on the book. For my part of the program, I'm going to talk about one aspect that from the beginning, I think the editorial committee was very conscious of. And in some respects, this facet of the book was pioneering. And that facet of the book is inclusion. I got a phone call from Bobbie, I guess it was March 13th, 14th, and she had an invitation to lunch at Panera Bread on March 15th, 2020, as COVID was just coming into its prominence. At lunch, Bobbie asked me if I would consider working on the book. I said, well, I hedged my answer and said, well, tell me more, I may be. I'll need to think about it regardless, but, and I can be a kind of insistent guy. And I said, I have a question for you. I was a high school debate coach, so I look at everything. And I said, well, I have a question for you. And my question was, will the effort be committed to telling the whole story? She looked a little bit puzzled, and I said, the story of all the people of Callaway County for all our 200 years. And as I said, I could be insistent. I said, now, if your answer is not an unqualified yes, then my answer is no. And I continued so that there's no misunderstanding. Here's what I mean. The story of women, the story of Black people, the story of rural Callaway Countyans, as well as the city fathers and mothers of Murray, the story of the 200 United States of America soldiers and Union sympathizers and the early Lincoln Republicans, as well as the story of the 800 Confederate soldiers, the story of town and gown. The 1950s, there was still an east side, west side dichotomy in Callaway County. So I said the story of east side and west side. Bobbie said that she was committed to telling the whole story. So I said, I'm still hedging. I said, I'll think about it. So I ultimately decided that I would work on the book, and a labor of love of 2.5 years followed. And I would stress both words, labor and love. If any of you out there are thinking of a similar effort to create any kind of a county history or whatever you might think about creating, remember those two words, and you might want to capitalize them, italicize them, underline them, put them in bold print, labor and love, because they are both very necessary. Now, I don't know how long we're going on, so somebody, Pat is usually at society meetings, my timekeeper, so.
Well, we don't have, I don't think we have. to
Okay.
worry about that.
Well, I have, she says, wrap up, so
Oh,
I'll wrap up. If you have any questions, then you can get into details. But two or three things, I ticked off the things that we try to be very inclusive about, but we came up with some very interesting stories about women. This is one of two Calloway County histories, 1931. It's largely a collection of sketches of Murray town fathers. In the entire book, I thought there were 3 pictures, but last night I looked through the book. Guess how many, and there are, how many pictures of women there are in the book? No, that's 100% too many. There is one, the sitting county court clerk. So we found things like the election of the first woman to public office in Calloway County. She was elected county superintendent of education in 1908, and she defeated the incumbent. Her name was Lucille Grogan. There were stories like 2 early Methodist missionaries to China and Korea, and I could go on. The first women on the city council, the first female magistrate. We looked at all them, found them, they're in the book. Dr. Oral Cress Mason, who was the Republican nominee for Congress in 1926, having defeated a male in the Republican primary. And she ran a very credible race for congressional representative, 1st district, from the Gibraltar of American democracy. Black persons. We discovered early on that there were 2 Rosenwald schools in Calloway County. I knew about Rosenwald schools, had no idea there were 2 here. Douglas School was one, and there was one at New Providence. And we have an idea of the general location, but we don't know much about the specific location, teachers, students, or anything like that, but we were glad to learn that. We have profiles, I call them bio sketches, of people like the 3rd Black mayor in all of Kentucky, who is the mayor of Hazel, Dennis Jackson, Dr. Theodore Roosevelt Mason Howard, who's an inspiration for not only Medgar Evers, but Rosa Parks, who heard him speak in Montgomery, Alabama. So the stories of Black people are included. The stories of rural folk, there's a real, get out the Kleenex, you will need it. To read the story of little Bonnie Lou Thomas, whose family did not have access to good health care. Her sickness was diagnosed as constipation. It was a ruptured appendix, and she died, and her family wrote her story. So the rural folk did not have good access to medical care. There's a story about Hazel as a nurturing, caring community. One person wrote about her special needs brother and the way the community looked out for him. So she characterizes Hazel as a good Samaritan town. Okay, I went over a little bit, but buy the book, read it, enjoy it, and reflect Don't just stop, but reflect upon it and the stories in it. Thank you. I apologize.
And I will jump in and say, you cannot read this cover to cover unless you have about 4 hours to absorb all the history that's in that book. It is an amazing book.
And scanning, I mean, it's not.
Well, you can, yeah, it's the kind of book you can pick up, read, put back down, pick up, read, put back down,
Yeah.
and just continue to do that and find something new every time you pick it up.
And the pictures too.
Your head.
Okay, well, I got one of those calls from Bobbie also in early 2020 asking me to go to lunch. So if you ever get one of those. let me know. And I don't know how many other people she had actually approached before she worked her way down the list to get to me. But in looking back, I think maybe one of the reasons that I was invited to participate is I'm pretty concrete sequential and task oriented. So that may be part of what I brought to the table. But it was, as Randy said, it was definitely a labor of love. I don't think we could have accomplished this without the COVID shutdown. So in the midst of all the misery of being shut down, I think it was, something good from our perspective. This book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, Stephen Covey says you should begin with the end in mind, which I think is easier said than done, particularly with this project. Last night, I started digging through some of the papers and notes that have filled my personal home library over the last 3 years and couldn't help but chuckle when I read a note that I had made in our March 2020 meeting, where the judge said he'd like a Chamber of Commerce type book that could be placed in local businesses so that people could thumb through it and find a good reason to move to Calloway County or why we are proud to be Calloway Countyans. Something about 200 pages long. And that was about as much of an end product as we were directed to start with. So we knew what we didn't want, and I will reiterate what Gina said about Acclaim Publishing and Doug Sykes, our publisher. He was so service-oriented and so participatory from the outset. He provided us with examples of books that other communities, other states, other organizations had put together for similar purposes, and we were able to pass those around, and in some cases they helped us determine what we didn't want to produce. And we stole some really good ideas from some of the books and tried to tweak those to fit our needs. So working with Acclaim Press was, I think, a key to our success. We wanted a richly illustrated coffee table format book, not a dictionary, because who likes to sit down and read the dictionary? And I'm at an age where I need larger print than what you're going to see in a dictionary. And I think that's one of the things that we've accomplished. Randy's shown you the book, but I don't know that you've had a chance to look at the inside. It is richly illustrated, and I think attention-getting as well as very factual. And as far as the process of putting this together, well, history is linear. So we started out with the timeline concept, breaking our history down into 20-year periods for the most part, starting with 1822 all the way through 2022. And I think that that was something the three of us probably collaborated on as closely as anything else we did. And probably the three of us were more responsible for that particular writing of the book than any other part of the book. And we call those period overviews. And then as we began to get into the period overviews of who remembered what when, the stories were somewhat included, but the real thing that makes history interesting, in my opinion, are the stories and the people. So we kind of moved away from the linear aspect of telling history from the beginning to the end, to telling history through the experiences and through the eyes of the people who lived each of those periods in history. And I don't know whose vision it was. I will credit Bobbie to inviting people to bring in their stories. Then we started to be concerned about how are we going to determine whose story is worthy of inclusion, for lack of a better term. You know, all of us believe our stories are worthy, and in one degree or another they are. But how do you decide what goes in the book? How do you decide what stays out of the book? And this is where we kind of went back to some of my experience as a teacher. I put together a how many page long criteria for submission description that is pretty boring looking, but we probably got away from it as the process rolled out, but we did go back and revisit it periodically when we were determining what would be included. We wanted to make sure that the content is fact-based, because we felt a tremendous responsibility that when we put something down on paper in writing and it's bound into a book of this size and scope, people tend to believe that it's the truth. And we wanted to be as careful as we could to make sure that we had done our research and that other contributors had done their research and that sources were identified. We wanted to make sure that what was included did fit in the appropriate and specific time periods, that it would logically feed into the structure of the book, that it was significant to Calloway County history, because a lot of folks have stories that might not be specifically relevant to Calloway County, and that these stories and biographies would promote what is unique about Calloway County, and that it would educate the reader and would be readable, and last of all, but maybe most important of all, would be entertaining. So we would go back and revisit these as we were discussing what to keep, what to include, who to invite, who to encourage. So we finished the timeline concept, the period overview concept, and it's a fairly short section at the front of the book. Then we broadened into topics, and we included what, 10 different topics? Arts and media, education, agriculture, business. And once we had those topics nailed down, they kind of triggered thoughts about who would be the expert in our community who could talk about the tapping plant and its impact on Murray and Calloway County. Or who would be the person that we could talk to about the used car industry? How did Murray become the used car capital of the world? When did that start? Why did it start? Are we still the used car capital of the world? So, and I will credit Bobbie again with this. We had over 400 contributors. We first, and this is one of the things I chuckled about also, in the early stages of discussions, we talked about maybe we could get 30 people to help us tell these stories and write these biographies. And I think we're very successful in being inclusive, not only in the sense that Randy described inclusive. We talked about all the people of Calloway County, but we had a whole lot of the people of Calloway County who did their own talking. So those were the important things that I felt like that I wanted to share with anyone who might want to tackle a project of a similar scope on your own.
And just to tag on to that, we did have to tell a few folks that what they had contributed we could not use, and that was not fun, of course.
And you got to know that.
And yes, that was not my favorite part of the job, but fortunately, we didn't have that many that we had to have that discussion with, and everyone was, for the most part, pretty gracious about that. So having the guidelines that she developed really made a huge difference, because we could say up front, this is what we're going by, and unfortunately, you know, what you have submitted is not going to fit these guidelines. So we at least had that to stand behind.
Well, we also built in, excuse me,
Not too
we
bad.
built in a little bit of wiggle room too, because in this book, you will find certain pages are shaded in beige. And that's our way of giving the reader a heads up that this may be the story of someone's individual family. It might not exactly meet the criteria that we outlined, but we allowed people to pay what we call sponsorship pages and write their own family history. It still had to meet certain criteria. Biographies were 300 words or less. Essays were 500 words or less. And those additional pages actually gave us an opportunity to add more content pages to the book as well. So I think we were able to address some of the desires of people to get their family stories in that manner.
And the big surprise for me on the sponsored pages were the churches, because the churches were the first ones to step up and want their histories included. And we're willing to, I mean, we had a few churches that bought more than one page because they wanted to tell their whole history. And so there was a word limitation even on sponsored pages. And the churches really came through. I was shocked at how many of them really came through.
So that is really indicative of Callaway County, because I think we have more churches, what, 120 churches?
It's a Jackson Purchase thing or West Kentucky thing. One of our most well-attended meetings was a meeting on the history of Baptists in West Kentucky that we had in Clinton, and we filled the Baptist Association room there, and they published, it was posted in the journal, the papers, and there's a Baptist Historical Society in Kentucky, the J.H. Spencer Historical Society. So yeah, it's a very much a West Kentucky thing, the sheer number of small rural churches that are still strong. And that's one of the things, one list of things I like about the book is that it captures that aspect.
And there are articles on the history of the different denominations that bridge individual congregations, like, well, the history of the primitive Baptists, the history of the Mormon community that was in Callaway County briefly.
And the other thing I'll mention from what Pat said, the timeline that we developed was so lengthy that it did not make it into the book. And the timeline is on Gina and the fiscal court put together a Callaway 2022 website. It's Callaway2022.com. And on that website, we have been able to put the timeline, which we were able to add pictures to and make it a sort of a graphically appealing bit of history that anyone can log on and see and enjoy. So that was something we did. That was probably the very first thing we did.
Well, and one of the other things that you asked me to mention was how we marketed,
Yes.
made the community and others aware of the book. And I think starting the website, Callaway 2022 website, was a major piece of marketing, posting the timeline so that people could go in there and get a feel for what we were working toward. And then we did a bicentennial minute, and I guess all of us are at a certain age and maybe more or less comfortable with technology than younger generations, but I really grew to appreciate Facebook in particular and the power of social media, not only in marketing the book, but in inviting people to participate. There's a Facebook page called Murray, Kentucky Memories. And when we started putting little kernels out about Callaway County history, we got such a response that we invited many of the people who are just members of that page to make contributions. And I think got a much richer product as a result of that. And then conversely, we use that page to market the book and let everybody know, hey, the books are in. Here's how you can go about purchasing one. So it was beneficial on both ends.
And bicentennial trivia questions
Yes.
continue.
Oh, yeah.
Every Friday, there's a trivia question, and you have to look for the answer in the Ledger and Times, and that will continue through December. Lynn at the end of December.
Well, just to finish up our panel discussion, our presentation, we did use a lot of social media, but I really started the outreach of trying to get writers through the Genealogical Society, the local, as well as the Jackson Purchase Historical Society. Those were our natural audiences. And so we definitely reached out to both of those groups. And then I think, Gina, the bicentennial committee that we put together just for the whole thing, which is a separate group than our book committee. The bicentennial committee included people that are involved with the school system, with the Murray State, and the chamber and civic organizations, and just really had a broad reach. I think we had a really good representative committee that helped to get the word out. Probably one of the first things Gina and I worked on was to create kind of a guide to the bicentennial. And I knew, like her, it's like, look at who's doing it somewhere else. And the state of Maine had an amazing website. And I copied a lot of the ideas that I had come up with from what Maine had done. So and then Murray and Calloway County has a lot of resources. We have, with the university, we have the Code Library, we have Bryant Museum. I mean, there's already a lot of resources to work with. And so that really helped a lot. And then we just used a lot of I started building an email list, a contacts list. And it started out with about 30 names, and it just kept growing. And that's how we finally discovered that we had around 400 people that had contributed, because as we began to count that kind of stuff up, but I was keeping a contact sheet with all of that information on it. I'm going to touch briefly on editing and proofing, which was probably, I wanted to hang myself a number of times for weeks on end. We had volunteers that stepped up and said that they would help proofread. And we had 2 people in particular that volunteered to help with fact checking. I got really tickled. One of the men I called to verify, I was looking up, I don't know why I was even looking at it, but I somehow stumbled across a date we had for an ancestor of his that was different. I saw different dates for his death date, so I called him. And he said, I can't believe you're checking that close. And so, that was purely by accident. And I'm sure there are, errors, typos and things that we would have missed. But we really tried to get it as right as we could. I will say the biggest, frustration for me in the editing process, we had proofreaders and fact checkers for all of the sections that we were doing, but the sponsored pages we did not have those until everything was done. And so those sponsored pages are not as well proofed as the rest of the book. And the reason that I bring that up is just for those who may be considering such a project. These are the kinds of things that make me want to scream. Clark's River is Clark's with an apostrophe or without. The Woman's Club in Murray is spelled Woman's Club, M-A-N-S, but in most or lots of other communities, it is Women's, M-E-N-S, M-E-N-S. So we have in our part of the book, I'm pretty sure we got all of those. Oh, the other thing is ledger and times. There's an ampersand for and. Some people spell it out, but theirs is an ampersand. So
is the name of the city, we went through this, is the name of the city, italicized is the name of the city, the name of the paper. I thought, well, I'm retired from professing English, and I thought that I had put my red pen away and would never bring it out again. I would not have to evaluate student paper. Yeah, I saw that while ago.
Less than most.
So out comes that red pen, and many an hour did I spend.
Yeah, but anyway, that was probably my biggest frustration, was to be consistent throughout the book. And then when the sponsored pages got put in, there was not consistency. So that's just something to be aware of.
Well, and advice to anybody consider, look and see if there is a style sheet.
Yes.
If your publisher has a style sheet. And if not, then you decide what style sheet you're going to use. And we went back and forth.
Many times, many times. And just to wrap up, the marketing side of it, because we have social media, it was easier, I think, to get the word out. Toward the end, getting close to the bicentennial and Founder's Day, I'll just kind of start us off and then you can wrap up how that came out. I put together a media list of the 8 Jackson Purchase counties, just who are the media in those counties, and that's was our target audience. Because we know a lot of people that have moved here or, were born here, maybe live somewhere else that would be interested are typically going to be in the Jackson Purchase, or often will be in the Jackson Purchase. But we also reached out to statewide publications, Kentucky Living, Kentucky Monthly. Seemed like there was one other that was a statewide, but anyway, we prepared materials on the county's letterhead, sort of a general press release that talked about Founder's Day, but also discussed the book. We submitted that with photography so that if a local, if a Mayfield Messenger wanted to run it, they already had photographs they could put with it. And I don't know that we got that many hits from that, but I know the West Kentucky News picked it up. Kentucky Monthly did run a 2-page spread, which was really nice. So we've been fairly successful, I think, in getting the word out, but we have totally relied, I think, on the Murray Kentucky Memories Facebook page and the county's Facebook page and our Calloway 22 page.
And our sales are very strong. We're
Yeah.
down to under 200 books left. Under 100,
Under
I'm sorry,
100,
significantly under 100 books left to sell locally.
And I will say, when we started the project, obviously we're county government. This was not a project that we intended to make money on. I mean, and this group, the book would not exist without this group, the support of the Jackson or the Historical Society, local Historical Society. So once we had the pre-orders confirmed, again, publisher being a great partner said, if you want to extend that and be able to make some money, I think we should go ahead and print. And then another, based on, again, the pre-orders, another set of books, and that 200, I think, is now what we're in the process of selling. So thankfully, the society is now able to garner those donations and that fund for whatever purpose that you all will want to use that money for in the future. So it was a significant project that the county made a commitment to early on as an entity. It could not have been done without the labor of love of these people and many, many, many others. And when you do something of this magnitude, not to say anything about Stephen Covey, but if I'd had this in mind when we started, we wouldn't have done it. Just saying. It was a work in progress. I mean, it did change many times in our minds. Okay, what are we really trying to accomplish here? What are we putting together? And some of those things that they talked about would not have happened had we not been flexible and had we not said, okay, publisher, we got another idea here going. Can we do this? So ask those questions, what's been done in the past, but what can we do? And so, yes, ours is different. Ours is unique. Ours is Calloway County all over the map. And so you want to celebrate that. So what we did on November the 3rd was not only celebrate our birthday, but we celebrated the book. I want to send a shout out to, and I will say November the 3rd is one of the few times that I can remember our entire community coming together for an event, and everybody was at the table. We had Murray State University, ROTC, Town and Gown, the president, many of our university students engaged, our school systems, both the city and the county came together. If you want to spend a little time and want to get out your Kleenex, go to the website and watch the 45-minute video on our front page of that ceremony, because the kids singing will just make you cry. But it was a great day. A lot of people came together, but for the book signing, our Playhouse in the Park stepped up and said, hey, what can we do that can be memorable and a part of this celebration? So we had lunch, which was all donated.
Tourism.
And
was very active.
the county tourism stepped up and helped with the lunch, but the Playhouse, they didn't have time to put an actual play together for people to watch. So they brought their volunteers together and they did period characters. So they dressed up, they had fun, they were enacting many of our people that were talked about in the book, and they walked around during the lunch and entertained, and it was just a really wonderful day. So I can't say enough about bringing all of your community partners together when you're in the early planning phases, because you never know what somebody's going to think of, and you never know what's going to kind of bubble up out of that conversation. One other thing I'll share, as we engaged those educational partners, one of the things that came to fruition was the fact that we needed something other than the book for our education, for our school kids. And so a couple of our volunteers were retired school teachers. They were able to work with the school system. We had 6 kids in a art class. It was Art 3 class at Calloway County. Literally went through and drew pictures of historical buildings in our society or in our community. So they put the pictures together in a book, in a coloring book, and then we did a coloring contest for all the 4th graders in the county, in the city and the county, and then gave away prizes on the Founders Day. So we have the book. It is actually on the website, so kids can still go on and they can print off the coloring pages. And so all of this will be saved for our history, for the future. And again, those were things that came out of that committee that if somebody said, here, you do this, I would never have thought of it. It just would not have come
And
together.
that product that has just recently bubbled up. We were fortunate to get in front of the leadership group of the high school students. The city and the county has had together their leadership program.
Tomorrow, yeah.
And so we did a presentation about the county's history in front of them. And I think the teachers were so wowed by the presentation and what we were doing with the book, that they wanted us to put it in some type of video so more of the students can see it. So Gina and I have applied for a grant to help us fund the video, and whether we get it or not, I'm sure we can eventually raise money to do it. But so we've recorded, we'll have this recording, which is nice. But we also recorded Founders Day, so hopefully we can use footage from that for the future video production for students. So.
One of Bobbie's phrases that became one of my favorite phrases and a kind of consolation for the entire project was many moving parts.
Yes. But I think that's our presentation for.
I'd like to ask a question.
Sure.
I would like to have each one of you pick one of the most memorable historical stories. And which one would you want to tell for the video? I'd like to have 4 different ones. So I think I'm such a lover of history. Anything will be happy. I'll be happy to hear anything. Which story would you want to tell if you had to pick one from your history?
I can go first. I have laughed over this since I found out about it. Of course, Calloway County is named after Colonel Richard Calloway, who was one of Daniel Boone's contemporaries in settling Boonesboro. He never made it this far west, but we honored him. Unfortunately, we changed the spelling of the name. Colonel Richard Calloway spelled Calloway Callaway, and we spell it Calloway. And we were kind of commiserating over the fact that we wish we could find a connection with Colonel Richard Calloway. And our county judge executive did some genealogical research and and found out that there is an actual descendant of Colonel Richard Calloway alive and living in Texas. He is a retired professional wrestler who went by the name The Undertaker.
Oh,
And when I was telling my 44-year-old son that, did you ever hear of The Undertaker? Because he was of an age where Hulk Hogan and some of those guys were big in his growing up years. He said, Mom, he was the first wrestler named to the Wrestling Hall of Fame. So he's not in Callaway County. He respectfully declined our invitation to come to the celebration, but that was one of the funniest things to come out of this project.
Is he in the book?
No, and we're gonna have to work him in somehow.
in our journal now, we
Right.
started having short, 1 to 3 or 4 page articles about people. We had Kenny Houston in the last issue, and we have a Shanty born black woman who was a midwife in Fulton in this issue. So we could publish a story on the Undertaker. Well, my kids will be excited about that too.
Yeah, they're talking about the same page. One other thing about the book, we ran across a lot of these little funny things. The word trivia, I think, maybe makes them seem unimportant, but they're really not unimportant. They're just small little tidbits that we didn't really have a way to work into the book. And so we started thinking about, well, why don't we just call it Callaway County Trivia? We decided to go away from that term. And so Bobbie, I think, came up with the phrase, now you know, and we've got little tidbits sprinkled throughout each one of the sections of the book, just random facts about Callaway County, the fact that we have over 800 miles of paved roads in Callaway County. So you could drive to Florida from here in less miles than it would take to drive every paved road in Callaway County.
Okay, I'm
Three more
gonna,
stories.
I'm gonna spin off of that, but somebody's gonna have to tell me where it is. In one of the, did you know, it talks about how we funded education in this.
Oh, the
Yes, where is it?
dog
Where
is
is it?
It's in the education.
Where is it?
section,
Okay,
mailed
all right.
off.
Okay, so somebody find that for me because I want to share this. I had no idea. And somebody find that for me because I want to read it. But I had no idea because my grandfather, Owen Billington, served in the legislature in 2 different capacities. He was in the House of Representatives and in the Senate. So digging up this history has been just so emotional for me, being able to put some of those articles into the book and share our family history. But one of the did you knows talks about how education in the state of Kentucky was funded. And I just want to share this because when I read it, I immediately went to Judge Imes because he's been in the legislature, and I said, did you know this? And he didn't know it either, which kind of made me laugh. And I said, well, we might want to go back and see if we can reinstitute this because it really, I think, might work to be able to generate some revenue for the county. So have you found it yet? I know. So now it's like, we
Well,
won't.
now the pressure's on too.
Yeah, the pressure's on to find it, but
Okay, Bobbie, go ahead and give us a story you
Well,
like.
there are 2 that immediately came to mind. The funniest thing to me through this whole thing is how many people wanted us to be sure that we included the murders and the mayhem that have occurred in history. There were 3 or 4 historic, I mean, they are in every history that have ever been written. But we did have one that had been in the 1931 book that he was sharing. There was a story in there about God, what year, it was very early, 1840s, I guess. Very early murder that had occurred, and it had remained unsolved. And so the 1931 states in there that it was an unsolved murder. And I don't know, just one day Googling, I put in the name, and sure enough, it came up, and we were able to resolve that murder because it had been in the news. One little random newspaper article had a confession. So that was probably my biggest fun out of all of the book. And then the other thing that I actually wrote for the Journal, because I was so impressed about it, Randy mentioned the first female that was elected as the superintendent of schools. I began, when I was researching about her, I learned that Calloway County and all of the counties in the Jackson Purchase at one time had moonlight schools. And I knew that Eastern Kentucky had moonlight schools, but I never knew that we had them here in Western Kentucky. And so that spawned a whole new research for me, just for fun, because I was interested in it. So those are my stories. Randy, what do you got?
Well, the Bonnie Lou story is very meaningful to me, as well as a similar story, which is very tragic. I had worked with some cousins on a Stubblefields compilation. I'm descended from Stubblefields, and we had come across an incident in New Concord history around, well, it was 1891. And Blood River near New Concord in those days flowed into the Tennessee River. And so a group of the young men in the community were seining in the place where Blood River flowed into the Tennessee River. A number of the men were in Blood River, and they had a seine on one side of the river, and then the seine reached across the river, and they were moving it along and getting fish in the net. Well, they came to a part of Blood River that looked very smooth on top, which was very deceptive. Underneath was a whirlpool. And the end of the story is that 5 of the young men in that small community were drowned on one day. I mean, probably within 30 minutes of each other. And one of them came to the surface, but they became entangled in the net. That was the problem. There was one guy who was not entangled, and the men on the bank said, go with the current, go with the flow. He did, and he lived to be 98 years old. But the ones who were entangled in the net drowned. But one of them came to the surface and said goodbye to his friends. He said goodbye, and on his tombstone, within a little rosette in the New Concord Cemetery, is the word goodbye. His name was Ed Brown. But can you imagine the effect in that community of 5 of the young men? One of them had a child born the month after he died. I mean, just those kinds of details, heartbreaking. So life was dangerous, very dangerous in those days. So that's a very meaningful story to me. I'll say one more thing about the book that relates to what Bill was saying and Bobbie was saying about the moonlight schools. From the very beginning, we hoped that, well, we realized we could not cover everything, no way, but that this would be a kind of springboard to academicians or to anybody who wanted to do future research. There are lots of topics in here that could be explored by academicians. And so we hope that it's not just closed forever.
So to talk about how important this book is, to our knowledge, the only history book published on Calloway County is the Kirby Jennings history book, which only goes up to 1979. So we had no documented history from 1979 to 2022 until this book. So yes, we hope people will become excited about and engaged in doing some more research. Okay, so can I read it to you now?
Please.
All right. So it's on page 192 under the education section. It says, did you know Effective in 1925, the Kentucky House of Representatives passed the Bell Dog Bill, providing for a tax of $1 on males and $2 on female dogs for the first one of each sex to be licensed by their owner, and $2 on males and $4 on females for each additional dog of either sex. This tax was used to partially fund public schools in the state of Kentucky. I think we could bring that back and fund some education. I really do.
If you include cats, you'd have a win.
We probably owns a cat.
Yeah, who wants to get that? Well, thank you all very much.
Well, I want to thank you, so